and it continued in service as an Episcopal church until the post-World War II years, was then deconsecrated and was on the brink of demolition in the 1990s when the NFL awarded a Major League Football franchise to Jacksonville, and the new owners of the team, in the form of Dolores Barr Weaver, noticed the church and helped spearhead a fundraising initiative to salvage it, to restore it, and return it to service. The Jacksonville Historical Society partnered with the city of Jacksonville in restoring the church. It continues to be owned by the city, but we are honored to have been its custodians and stewards since it was put back into service in 1998. And so this is a historic structure. It's a good place to have educational programs, right? But it also sort of reflects part of our mission, which is to strengthen Jacksonville's citizenship by educating its citizens about their history and about advocating for historic preservation. We try to be models of that mission and that work, and helping preserve and reuse this historic church is one way we do that. I am Alan Bliss. I'm the CEO of the Jacksonville Historical Society and the Jacksonville History Center. And our speaker series events, our programs, are sponsored again by Retina Associates, Drs. Mansour Lugal and Fred Lambro. We appreciate their support. We appreciate the support of the City of Jacksonville, the Cultural Council of Greater Jacksonville, a number of corporate partners, foundations, generous individuals, and also members. And I'm hoping that there are some members of the Historical Society among the audience here this evening. How many are actually members of the JHS? Thank you very much for belonging and for being supporters of our work. And if there, for those of you who are perhaps not yet members, that's a condition that we can help remedy this evening. If you would be interested, we would be honored to have you with us, and we would welcome your membership and your engagement with our work at whatever level you consider appropriate. There's information about that at the welcome table. Thanks so much to the staff and volunteers of the Jacksonville Historical Society who make these programs possible. I'm going to welcome the board member of the Historical Society in a moment, who will introduce our speaker. But tonight's program is something that is evocative of a part of Jacksonville's history that actually helps do what we really like best to do with Jacksonville's history, which is to tell a large story about U.S. history in a Jacksonville context. This city is big and sprawling and complicated, and it has been that way since the late 19th century. And what we're going to learn about tonight helps explain some of the characteristics of Jacksonville's development during its rise to prominence as Florida's leading city. It helps explain something about the Great Depression, the New Deal, the interventions of the federal government that helped cushion the worst effects of the Great Depression. It helps explain things about culture and the relationship between the arts, culture, and history, and civic life and citizenship. Viola Muse is the name of the subject of the program. And is that not a beautiful name, Viola Muse? All that we know about Ms. Muse suggests two, and we know a great deal about her. Not as much as we'd like, but we will learn more tonight as a group. All that we know about her suggests that she was beautiful not only in her name, but in her persona, in her spirit, in her affinity for the arts, and her sensitivity to the roles of those things in the lives of those that she observed and about what she wrote. So it's going to be particularly interesting to me, and I think to all of us, to learn more about her. So with that, I'm going to call upon my colleague in the teaching of history, Dr. David Jamison, professor of history at Edward Waters University, and a board member of the Jacksonville Historical Society, the chair of our programs committee, and he is many, many other things in Jacksonville. He is a good citizen, and so it's an honor to have him with us, and I welcome him.
thank you, all of you, for joining us this evening. We're very excited about this program. I first met Dr. True Leverette Hall during the pandemic when we were doing some conferences and meetings on the different topics that were on our mind at that time, especially regarding education and the difficult social and racial issues that we are dealing with. And I found her to be a thoughtful, intelligent, and insightful scholar, and I'm proud to call her a colleague and a friend. She is the professor of English and Africana Studies at the University of North Florida, where she teaches African American literature and writing courses. Her research focuses broadly on race, mixture, gender, justice, and mindfulness in literature and culture. In 2021, Dr. Leverette Hall published the edited collection With Fists Raised, Radical Art, Contemporary Activism, and the Iconoclasm of the Black Arts Movement. And in 2022, she published the single-author book, The Mindful Classroom, Constructive Conversations on Race, Identity, and Justice. She is a collaborator on the National Endowment for the Humanities-funded Viola Muse project and is a teaching and capacity-building fellow with the Digital Ethnic Futures Consortium, which fosters digital humanities research and teaching. Dr. Leverette Hall is also a certified yoga and meditation teacher who often incorporates yoga and mindfulness practices in her university classes to help students foster a more holistic, rather than exclusively intellectual understanding of themselves and their place within communities. She has also been a contributing blogger for Mixed Root Stories and is currently an advisory circle member with Women Writing for Change, with Women Writing for a Change, Jacksonville. I am happy to introduce my friend and colleague, far more than a scholar, Dr. True Leverette Hall.
Thank you. Will I need this? You think I'll need this?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much. That's a really warm welcome from you, Dr. Jameson, and you, Dr. Bliss, as well. I hope that this presentation actually does everything that you said it was going to do, so we'll see. But thank you. Yes, I'm pleased to be here tonight, and I have Dr. Jameson to thank for the invitation, and Ms. Kate Halleck to thank for coordinating everything, and even being out there when I didn't know where to park. So thank you. Right on time. And thanks to all of you as well for coming out tonight so that we can have some conversation about Viola Muse and her contributions to the Federal Writers Project and what that meant in Jacksonville's history. I guess it's this one with the right arrow. Oh, okay. So I would be remiss as well if I didn't thank the Jacksonville Historical Society itself, who has this collection of the Viola Muse papers in its collection. So thank you, JHS, for allowing myself and my co-collaborators on this project of the Viola Muse digital edition, Drs. Laura Heffernan and Dr. Clayton McCarl. Thank you for allowing us access to these wonderful papers. And also to Mitch Heeman and the Ritz Theater Museum, who also provided us with some additional photographs from their collection that feature Viola Muse. So, had any of you heard of Viola Muse before this announcement? Okay, wonderful. Would you mind sharing?
Well, if that's who I think it is, she was my kindergarten teacher.
I wonder. And what is your name?
My name is Frances Yvonne Hicks.
Wonderful. Thank you.
And I have a photograph, and I think there are two other people. We were in kindergarten together.
I think we've spoken to Mrs. Pat Bell, who also was a kindergarten student of Viola Muse, and we would love to talk to you with your memories and see the photograph that you you for being here tonight. I think we should also have you speak a little bit. Because I'm sure they're a wealth of information for us. So then, Viola Muse really is a new name for most people in this room. And so I think I will start us off by introducing us to her.
I can do it for you.
Thank you. Thank you. So, who was Viola Muse? Like a lot of women at her time, she's actually the one here in the back left. This is her sister Viola, and that was her husband, Priestley Leonard Mullins, in the front right. So Viola Muse was a very accomplished woman. She was a college graduate, a philanthropist and clubwoman, a hair salon and beauty school owner, a patent holder of hair products like Madam C.J. Walker, a Federal Writers Project worker, as you know, and a kindergarten teacher, as you also now know. Born Viola B. Walker, she was the daughter of William H. Walker, Jr. of Huntsville, Alabama, and Annie Lori Walker Pleasance of Cincinnati, Ohio. During our genealogical searches, we found that she was born on April 11th, yesterday, in 1898 in Alabama. Although there is a 4-year discrepancy about her birth year, the Florida Death Index, in that I found that it listed her birth year as 1898, but the Social Security Death Index records show her birth in 1894, so there is that discrepancy. Nicknamed Vi, Muse had a sister named Viola L. Walker, whose married name was Day. So, when Muse was 2 years old, the family moved from Alabama to St. Louis, Missouri, where she was raised until the age of 16 or 20. It's likely here where she met her first husband, Priestley Leonard Mullins, who was a 1905 graduate of Howard University's pharmacy department, and he worked as a druggist in St. Louis. One possible scenario that we've thought of for her meeting of him would be through her sister Viola, who also had a pharmacy degree. She graduated in 1909 from Meharry Pharmaceutical College, and that pharmaceutical school was part of Meharry Medical College, founded in 1876 as the medical department of Central Tennessee College, which was the second oldest medical school for African Americans in the country and the first one in the South. And also of an interesting note, 2 of Zora Neale Hurston's older brothers also graduated from Meharry. So in some ways, the circles are small in the world at that time. Census records from 1940 indicate, as I said, that Muse was a college graduate, although we're not sure yet where she went to school. And the family appears to have been part of the early 20th century black middle class, interested in racial uplift through education and credentialed careers. Thank you. In 1914, Viola and Priestley moved to Nashville, Tennessee, where Mullins, his father, and his brother, Moses F. Mullins, founded the Bull, Hair, and Beauty Culture College, incorporated in December of 1915. Viola was listed in their records as superintendent of instructions. And the school seems to have offered training to estheticians on site in Tennessee and likely in other areas as well. One of the photographs that we found shows the staff of the beauty college in Tampa, Florida, so they might have been mobile in some ways. However, after a legal battle among the Mullins men over the administration of the college, Viola and Priestley moved here to Jacksonville, Florida. Priestley died soon thereafter in April of 1920 and is buried in Old City Cemetery. Beginning 6 months later, in October 1920, Muse applied for multiple patents of hair and scalp products that Mullins had created as a pharmacist. These hair and scalp preparations and, quote, oil for massaging the temples were trademarked by B.B. Mullins in 1921. So if we can move on to one more slide. Thank you. Oops. One more. Thank you. So in 1920, Muse registered the Viola Lowell Beauty Culture College with an address on Monroe Street in Chicago. So we have found records from some of the newspapers that she did travel quite extensively between Jacksonville and Tampa, where she also did some of her FWP work, and Jacksonville and Chicago, where her mother lived after her father died. There's even a newspaper article that says that she was traveling on the same train car as A.L. Lewis to visit Chicago to visit her mother. So, again, small circles. By 1923, Muse ran a hair salon and a beauty school by the same name as Viola out of the Masonic Temple on Broad Street, which we still can see today. That building also housed the office of lawyer John P. Muse, whom Viola married in October 1922. And that was a fun little search to contact the city of Jacksonville, clerk of the court, and get a copy of their marriage certificate. So she was a member of the Ebenezer Methodist Church, although the handwriting on that marriage certificate is unclear about who married them. The couple lived at 1468 Steele Street, west of Myrtle Avenue in Turkeyville, just down from Smalls Field, where the National Negro League baseball team played. Thank you. So, in 1936, Muse was hired as a field worker for the Negro Writers Unit, the NWU, of the Florida Federal Writers Project Division of the Works Progress Administration, a position she held until 1939. Okay, one more. Thank you. The Negro unit was segregated from the main office, which was located on Duval Street. The Negro unit was housed in the Clara White Mission on Ashley Street, and they, at the Eartha M.M. White Museum, still have a wonderful collection of Eartha M.M. White's papers and a lot of information about the FWP and some of the writings from the Negro writers who worked there. So Florida's NWU was the largest and the first in the nation, and there were 10 African American writers who were employed there, including Zora Neale Hurston, which you probably know. So we may advance once more. Thank you. So this slide shows some of the prominent Jacksonville and Northeast Florida women who were affiliated with the Florida Federal Writers Project. Dr. Karita Doggett Corse, whose papers are in the archives at Jacksonville University, was the statewide FWP director. And as you can see under the image of Zora Neale Hurston, in 1935, she wrote to the national director, Harry Alsberg, and said that we feel that a statewide Negro project under Zora Hurston would be of great value. Hurston was hired in 1938, but she worked there for only a few months into 1939. And of course, the stories are that she was notorious for going back to Eatonville and doing her own work and then getting phone calls about needing to submit work and kind of dashing off something or sending something that she had already gathered for her own work to the office here in Jacksonville. Then also affiliated with Mary McLeod Bethune, an early advocate for the Negro Project and a volunteer supervisor, and Eartha M.M. White, who offered the Clara White Mission to house the segregated NWU and other WPA projects. So again, a lot of people circulating who knew each other. Next slide, please. Thank you. So this is one of the type-written documents that Viola Muse produced. And her papers reflect a history of everyday Black life in the Jim Crow South in Jacksonville. They also record the memories of formerly enslaved residents and finally add to conversations about the institutional workings of the Florida Federal Writers Project, including the working relationships of Black writers and white editors and the practices of white editors with the writing of Black writers. So my colleague, Dr. Laura Heffernan, this semester is teaching a graduate class that uses our Wyoming's digital edition and looks at the FWP. And I am teaching a Black American literature class that does the same thing. Some of Dr. Heffernan's students are investigating and comparing documents between what was actually published and what we have in terms of Viola Muse's notes to see what was published and what wasn't, the nature of the editorial changes that might have been made, etc. So there's lots to study there. So Sterling Brown, a noted poet, but also the FWP's Negro Affairs editor from 1936 to 1940, put forth the ambitious idea to create a national study on the portrait of the Negro as an American. thereby documenting Black history throughout the states as a valuable and noteworthy part of the broader American experience. And so this is part of what was being done, and also part of what was being contested in the Federal Writers Project, and why it's so important to see the work of the white field writers versus the Black field writers. What the focus was in terms of what they were collecting, and how even the voices were changed of people who were the interviewees. So it's fascinating that there were sometimes, one of the documents that we found listed the ways in which dialect was supposed to be transcribed or not transcribed. So these were political choices that were being made about how to represent the African American vernacular English. And so there were contested voices about how that should look. So I want to read a little bit from Catherine Stewart's really wonderful book, Long Past Slavery, Representing Race in the Federal Writers Project. This book looks closely at the work of Black writers in the FWP, and specifically at the ex-slave narratives, which of course are digitized and available publicly through the Library of Congress. And so that's a fascinating place to go look and explore. So as Stewart writes, white Southerners had a desire to publicize a narrative of the historical past of slavery that rewrote the script of race relations. Quite literally, they wanted to turn faithful slaves and rename them former servants. So this was the language that was being changed. And to delimit Black agency as African Americans agitated for the rights of full citizenship. So they were continuing the longevity of icons like Uncle Tom and Aunt Jemima. They were at once a response to the strained financial circumstances of many whites and the increasingly successful attempts of Black labor to organize. However, many African Americans, of course, were eager to bury these stereotypes of Black servitude, and they worked on multiple fronts to correct popular misconceptions about the past and also Black identity by publishing histories and post-Belma slave narratives, circulating counter-images and writings through the Black press and the Black arts movement of the time, and creating their own forms of commemoration through Emancipation Day celebrations and public parades. The political stakes were high in determining whose representations of African American identity would be valorized as authentic. Of course, a struggle that we know continues today. And I will just say, since she mentioned Emancipation Day celebrations, that the Beaches Museum is having a celebration of Florida's emancipation on Saturday, May 20th at 11 a.m. So if anybody's interested in that, that's coming up. Thank you. So Viola Muse then was part of this process of documenting Black lives and Black American history. This document, of course, is hard to read on the screen, but it records Muse's notes on Mrs. Rebecca Fulton, who was born in Darien, Georgia, and arrived in Jacksonville about 50 years prior to Muse's interview of her. The document actually says, great-grandparents were first to buy property when laid off Jacks. I guess that means when they arrived in Jacksonville, bought almost a whole block where Immaculate Conception White Catholic Church stands. Also, a little bit inexplicable, it says quiches up at the top, which to me indicates the probability of an often personal nature to the conversations Black interviewers were able to have with Black residents, whom they might have already known from church or other community institutions. It's assumed that most Black field writers would have put Black interviewees at greater ease than white interviewers. Zora Neale Hurston writes in her collection, Mules and Men, about what she coins featherbed tactics of Black people in the presence of many white people. She uses this term and says, the probe might go in from a white person, but it will be swallowed by niceties and yield no results for the person who's interviewing. So they'll think they're getting all kinds of information, but really they're getting nothing. And they're being tricked in large part. Still, class differences could result in even Black writers being met with these featherbed tactics. And you may know the story of Hurston when she first began to conduct her anthropological fieldwork in Polk and Orange counties here in Florida. She was dressed in, store-bought clothes, so they probably seemed like some finery to people working in the sawmills and the orange groves there. She was driving her automobile, Sassy Susie, of course. And so she didn't get any information initially. No one wanted to speak to her because they thought she looked too rich. She looked like she might be somebody who was going to turn them in for wrongdoing. She might be working with the law. So she played the trickster, right? And she told them that she was a bootlegger on the run from the authorities, and they gave her everything she wanted in terms of interviews. So again, those class differences could make a difference in the information that was put forth. So black field workers like Hurston, as part of the in-group, could often read and appropriately respond to the cultural ways of interviewees. They could often recognize signifying when it occurred, as when one interview also documented in the Stewart book, one interviewee complained of being bitterly, bitterly hungry, like too hungry, I can't recall anything you're asking me, I'm so hungry. So the next time the interviewer came, they brought food. And the interview went successfully. So, thank you. So, we also, some of Viola's papers show, her industriousness. She used the quartered federal job relief forms as scrap paper. And in this one, she's calculating what age one of her interviewees, formerly enslaved Charles Coates, was when emancipation was declared in 1865. So, those are her scribbled calculations up there. So Muse and other black writers helped document the experiences of formerly enslaved black people and were often allowed that access to information that would not likely have been shared with white interviewers who were sometimes given and often chose to create a romanticized version of black experiences of enslavement, as noted in the earlier quotation from Stewart. So this is part of another one of her typescript documents. It's a draft of her interview with Irene Coates, who was the wife of Charles Coates. Irene said that no difference was made in dealing with the two sexes. Women and young girls were treated with the same harshness as the men. So, the narrative that a lot of white interviewers were spinning, and also sometimes were told to kind of smooth things over, because sometimes interviewees thought that they would receive something, some compensation, some kind, if they kind of played nice and went along. Viola was able to gain information about the true harsh conditions that people were experiencing or had experienced. So, thank you. So this is Viola Muse and her good friend Caledonia Simpson here in Jacksonville. A lot of she was a writer, and she documented everything. So a lot of the photographs have her handwriting on the back, and she called this woman Callie. So a lot of the documents say, or the pictures say Vi and Callie. So black interviewers, as community members, were able to participate in and document the everyday lives of black Jacksonville residents in the 1930s. It's a wonderful record. During that time, the city was in transition from its majority black constituency during Reconstruction to its experiences of Jim Crow segregation. Many of the interviews document the lost history of Jacksonville residents swept up in the Great Migration, which was going on, of course, and continued for decades. A history that has not yet been fully claimed and memorialized by our city. So we do know a lot of prominent names, right? We know James Holden Johnson, we know John Rosamond Johnson, we know Zora Neale Hurston, but there are so many additional people who went on to do amazing things from the city. To give one example, Muse profiles Benjamin A. Richardson, an artist who had already left Jacksonville by the 1930s to attend Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University, and then went on to Harvard Divinity School. Richardson then authored the popular textbook American Negroes, which was published in 1945, and he became a civil rights leader in Chicago. Aside from Muse's profile, he remains unclaimed by Jacksonville, his hometown. And this is one of many strands extending outward from the robust and lively African American community in Jacksonville that Muse profiled in the 1930s. In addition to adult lives, Muse also documented the lives and work of children and students, most notably through their artwork. So I have to say that one folder of the 17 folders in the collection, this one called Art in Schools, is delightful, and we really, really enjoy enjoyed this. It's among the most delightful in the collection. As a policy, art wasn't taught in Negro schools at this time, but of course the teachers recognized and fostered students' artistic abilities and knew the importance of art and beauty in all people's lives. So this is, I have my notes on the bottom of my PowerPoint, but this is by Clarence Stone, a drawing of Charles Lindbergh, Charles A. Lindbergh, Spirit of St. Louis, and I can't remember the first words, but flew from New York to Paris in 33 and a half hours. So this was Clarence Stone, who was one of the 6th graders at Leverette Park School, and that's his artwork that she collected. Thank you. So in addition to the visual arts, she also collected the poetry and the literary arts of students. So this is Althea Golden's. She was also a 6th grade student at the Leverette Park School. This is called Summer. Would you mind reading the poem? Do you have the notes at the bottom, or no, you don't have that view?
Yeah, I do have the notes.
Would you mind reading the poem?
Okay. Summer is here again. The birds are singing sweetly and the flowers are beginning to bloom. Then you know that winter has gone by and good old summer is here again. Beautiful summer is here again. The flowers are smelling sweet. The grass is green as can be. The trees are beautiful and bright. We all know that summer is here again.
Thank you. The handwriting isn't always easy to read, so I appreciate you doing that. So again, that's Althea Golden, a 6th grade student, so she would have been, about 12 years old, 11 or 12 years old. One last one. So I will have to read this one. So this is Viola Muse's notes. It says at the top, art, Viola Muse over on the right. Emerson B. Bryant, a student at Hampton Institute, Hampton, Virginia, was awarded a scholarship by that institution because of his outstanding work in drawing. He was born at Blank and came to Jacksonville with his mother, Blank, and attended the public schools in the city. He is a graduate of Stanton High School, class 1935, and upon graduation was presented the scholarship of $100. His work in freehand and landscape drawing merit close attention and are noteworthy. He is majoring in commercial drawing for a BS degree, and his home address on Davis Street here in Jacksonville. So documenting again the adults and the children who were doing wonderful things at the time and going on to do additional things. Thank you. And so in keeping with her interest in children, after her work with the Federal Writers Project, Muse ran a private kindergarten here in Jacksonville out of her home on Steel Street. So this is kindergarten children from November 6, 1961. Her kindergarten was called the Jack and Jill Kindergarten, but it was not affiliated with the society of the same name and was in operation into the 60s. The Muses also had one child, a daughter they adopted in the 1950s. This daughter, Patricia Sharon, was the biological child of Gloria Cole and subsequently had one son whom they named John Priestley Muse, Viola Muse's only grandchild. Both descendants are deceased, and it's unknown to us whether Muse had any living relatives, but we're definitely always hoping for people to come forward and tell us what they know about her. Muse died in Jacksonville on February 6, 1981, and is buried in Memorial Cemetery. We also had the pleasure, in addition to getting to talk to former students, Pat Bell, her goddaughter's daughter, Gwendolyn Thompson, also got in touch with us. So little by little, people who did know her are making themselves known to us so that we can help to document her life and work even more fully. Thank you. So, the transcribed and digitized papers, which are wonderfully, there are some of them available for us to see tonight in the back of the room, but they're now publicly and widely available on the Viola Muse digital edition. So that's the URL, but I've also left some postcards out at the front with the URL on the back if you'd like to go explore. So we're grateful that we were awarded a National Endowment for the Humanities grant to do the work of transcribing and digitizing these papers. So if you wouldn't mind taking us to the actual digital era, right? It's got that Art Deco kind of feel, the V, looks like a book, so she did a great job with that. So what we have here are, in addition to the documents themselves and the images, we have contextualizing essays on the Federal Writers Project, on her, Viola Muse herself, and on the geographies of Black Jacksonville, so sections on the villa at the time, Turkey Villa at the time, changes to those areas certainly after I-95 went in, and the changed landscape, etc. After those city plans were implemented. We also have digital maps and editorial notes and annotations. So you can see here the handwritten and typed documents, as well as directly transcribed and reading versions. So we could just go, let's see. So context, thank you, has the contextualizing essays that I mentioned. We can go look at items. And we can scroll down. So they're here. This is entitled All Die Together from the Florida Negro. So found on page 31 with the manuscript copy of the Florida Negro housed in the State Archives of Florida, etc. So if you click on that one, yeah, that can go down. So we got metadata that describes the documents, their date, their format. Thank you. Then you can see the document itself, as well as, if you go farther down, the transcription. So you have to click in that area, and then it would scroll for you. So there are lots of versions. There's this reading version, and there's the transcription version, which actually will record the indents and the mistakes and the spellings and everything from the original document. And we also have a lot of editorial annotations. So all of the place names, for example, are in one color, and you can click on those place names and go to a place index and go to its location on the map, which our colleague Dr. Clayton McCarl was the master of all the actual transcribing and the digitizing portion, that HTML and XTML and all of those things that are not my forte. So there's lots of information here, and it's organized in multiple ways so that people can hopefully get a lot of interesting information that they're looking for. So I hope you do go take a look at that and read what's here. And then we've also, as I said, been wanting to use this information in schools because these kind of primary resources are so valuable for students. Certainly are incredibly valuable when teachers are having to pull books out of their classrooms, etc. So I think primary documents are one of the best ways to engage students with ideas and issues that we're still dealing with, but in a way that is completely that's accessible to so many. So, as I said, Dr. Heffernan's graduate students have been working with a lot of the material here and doing a lot of research, and my students in Black American literature this semester were charged, one of their group assignments that I gave them was to create lesson plans to help area teachers, if they're interested, think about ways that they can use this information in their own classrooms. And so the 5 groups created 5 different lesson plans, and they were also then charged with adding a visual or digital component to their lesson plan. And so I did want to share this with you. This is from one of the groups, and it was just such a beautiful way that they presented the information from their lesson plan. It's Jacksonville's educational timeline, but also they were inspired by the Art in Schools folder, and so it's a lot of it is Jacksonville's art education history. So if you were to click on one of these, it's a Prezi, so it's real fancy in its movement, but 1869, if you click on that, so Stanton Normal School, named for Edward McMaster Stanton, second Secretary of War under Lincoln, opened its doors. It was the first public school for Black children in Florida. And if we click on that arrow down at the bottom, we'll go to the next one more click. Thank you. So they've documented in 1900, James Holden Johnson writes Let Every Voice Sing, which is Brother scroll out again. That button, thank you. Yeah, so Eartha White officially founds the Claire White Mission, etc. And so they moved all the way into, I think, what is it, 2016, when the Florida Arts Association is started. So, thank you. So, in response, this is interesting, 1915, in response to Duval County School Board's plan to eliminate Stanton School and replace it with smaller schools in different locations, the Stanton Board of Trustees files an injunction, and the parties settle out of court. In September of 1950, the school board agrees to construct a new Stanton High School on the site of the earlier three school buildings. The second Stanton school was destroyed in the Great Fire, and the inferior construction of its replacement reflected the low priority for black education during Jim Crow. The board's injunction is considered an early civil rights case victory. The new building opened its doors in 1917. So lots of great information, images, and as I said, wonderful ideas for how to utilize the information from the Viola Muse digital edition and the Viola newspapers in classrooms, how students could engage with this material. So thank you for navigating us in that way. So that's what I brought to share with you tonight, but I'd love to have a conversation if you have comments or thoughts or questions. We have the Florida guide, which, Dr. Heffernan students are looking at that closely. It's assumed that most of what Zora Neale Hurston wrote for that, it's been assumed that most of that didn't get published. But in some documents that one of her grad students just found, she actually found a copy of the manuscript that actually credits Zora Neale Hurston, on the title page. But of course, that's not what gets published, right? So that is absolutely something that people are looking at, and we are wanting to look at more closely as well, certainly with the documents that are here. Dr. Heffernan is going to go to USF, University of South Florida, this summer in Tampa, because they have some papers from Viola Muse as well, since she did work in Tampa as well. Thank you for your question. Hi.
Will the Eartha White visualization project be a final project similar to what you've done with Viola Muse?
I think, the Eartha and White digital collection, special collection it's huge. It's big. It came first, but it is such a big collection that it's still being transcribed and digitized. And what we've been able to do with the Viola Muse digital edition in a short amount of time is because the collection is small. But yeah, the work is still ongoing with Dr. McCarl is one who is in charge of editing the Eartha M. White collection, which is a project that he's been running since 2016, I believe. So each semester there is a student intern who is kind of responsible for doing a lot of the transcribing and editorial work, working on metadata, digitizing and putting those things online. And then this past March? Yes, it was last month. We had our first public transcription workshop, which was wonderful. So we are wanting to do more of that, where we actually bring the documents, and some of the members of ASALA were kind enough to join us. So we bring some of the documents, photocopies of the documents, and people transcribe those onto digital devices, and then that student intern can go and edit and double check, and we can create metadata, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a big project, but it's an exciting one, and one that we hope a lot more people will be able to be involved in. And I don't know, but I think everybody had a good time as well. And it's really wonderful to be able to see those documents firsthand and to do a little bit of the sleuthing, right? So sometimes things are hard to read and it's hard to puzzle things out, but those discoveries are a lot of fun.
How did you come upon Viola? How did this?
This is COVID. This is COVID and Dr. Heffernan. I don't remember. Was it Mitch Heeman that she talked to first? I believe.
I don't remember exactly how that started, but
Well,
it rose out of our discovery of that collection at the JHS.
Yeah.
And I'm not remembering who it was at UMF that picked up the thread from that.
yeah. So it was during COVID, and Dr. Heffernan was looking for a project. She is definitely an archivist. She's a literary archivist, so she does that work in her scholarship. And she had talked to someone at the JHS, and they had mentioned this collection, and were kind enough to share it. So, is that how I can say it? Is that?
Yeah.
Hopefully that was okay at the time. But yeah, I brought it over to her house. Again, it's 17 folders, so it's a small little archivist box, archival box. And just looking through it, she knew what was there. She knew it was important, just like the
Can I
Jackson
ask
Historical Society.
This was a wonderful talk. Thank you very much. My question is about the WPA and how it was organized in general for choosing what the theme should be for research, and then the idea of having sort of two segregated units, a white unit and a black unit, working on the same topic. So was that a Jacksonville thing, or that was a federal thing?
This is a national debate, and so there
But it
are...
was also an organization. It wasn't just a debate. You had two sets of laborers.
Correct. Yeah, but there was tension over how to continue to run, and who should have, like as I said, Zoriel Hurston was supposed to be the Negro editor here in the Jacksonville office. She never was, because of that kind of tension, racial tension, and racism. So
And the tension is well documented in the papers.
yes, well, in scholarships such as Catherine Stewart's, not in the Viola Muse collection, I wouldn't say, unless you're doing that comparative analysis of what got published versus what's in her notes and her field notes. But yes, the scholarship does show that this is a national conversation. There are people in the national office, such as Harry Osberg, who is in part for that inclusion of African Americans as part of the national story and the national history. And then there are others who are saying that no, we don't want that. We want to have a particular romanticized version of the past. This is, Depression era. We have a particular idea of what we want to remember, what we want to urge us going forward. So that is a tension that exists versus all of these people who recognize that the American story, that African American stories are integral to the American story, and knew that story needed to be told. Especially if this is the Jim Crow South, but this is also, still the 1930s. This is part of the Harlem Renaissance, and so we have African Americans themselves who are certainly wanting to say this is who we are, right? And this is who we are as citizens of this country. So yeah, it's an important debate that happened, but as you're pointing out, there's a clear segregation. This is the Jim Crow South.
But in the end, was it empowering for the African American community in Jacksonville that they had their own community of intellectual workers doing this project.
I think that's empowering nationwide. That there were African American intellectuals, writers, artists who were, excuse me, doing the work of remembering and doing honor to the history and the present of African American presence in the country. So here in Jacksonville, I think, as I tried to point out, I think some of the circles are fairly small. What we are noticing, what seems clear to me, is that because Viola Muse was part of this black middle class, because she was part of this, more well-off section of society, they were already doing a lot, right? She was a club woman, she was a philanthropist. Her mother was a club woman in Chicago and a philanthropist, and president of an AIDS society for young girls, etc. So they were empowered and empowering already through the work that they were doing, and I think that having this avenue of the Federal Writers Project would certainly have been something that got put to good and important use. I mean, that's why we have the Library of Congress 2000 slave narratives, right? These were interviews that were conducted during that time. So definitely important.
Were she and Zora Neale Hurston contemporaries?
They were. So she was in the office at the same time. They would have been, at first it was there 38 to 39. Then Viola Muse was there 36 through 40.
So here in Jacksonville.
Oh yeah. But you know the story of maybe a person, just kind of flitting in and then flitting out back to Eatonville, back to her own work.
How much of this will be shared with young students? Can it start to
As much as possible, I hope. We've organized a symposium in, let's see, April 26th. There's lots of dates, lots of things happening. But April 26th that we've invited a lot of DCPS and St. Johns County teachers to. One of the panels is about how to use the UNF special collections in classrooms, how our professors are already using them, how one of my students doing an independent study this semester, how she has benefited from the special collections. So we're really hoping to spread the word. Are you a teacher?
Oh, I'm not, but it's funny because last night I was watching PBS and they had a show on a very famous photographer, and I can't remember his first name, but his last name is Parks.
Oh, Gordon.
Yes. And he brought African American living, he brought it to life, and it wasn't all black. Something that was doing I'm just so happy to have this opportunity to hear about something that we all like.
Yeah, I think that's hugely important, and another reason why Zora Neale Hurston is such a light, right? Because she was concerned with the everyday, the interior lives of African Americans, and so we're seeing the same thing.
Have your students done any work with the discovering the history of the Flagler School that was for Black students?
My colleague, Dr. Beasley,
And also the Rhoda Martin School at Jackson Beach.
another one of my colleagues, has worked with the Rhoda L. Martin Center. He's in the Department of Education, Dr. Chris Jansen. But my colleague, Dr. James Beasley, in the English department, has done a lot of work with the Lincolnville Historical Society and the Lincolnville Museum. And so his students do this kind of digital work for the museum. They had a project not long ago documenting the photographs, I think, that are in the collection and digitizing those, and also doing some work, and I'm not remembering the details, but work of African American veterans that whose names were there at the Lincolnville Museum, and some information about their ability to, or inability to, buy homes and land.
Did she grow up here? Did she go to school here?
Viola Muse grew up in, she was born in Alabama and then moved to St. Louis. So she didn't come to Jacksonville until 1914, and she was, or until, 1920, and she was already married. So she was an adult. Yes, it is on the bio. Any other thoughts or questions?
the decades of the 1920s and the 1930s, but I think especially the 1930s in Jacksonville are the most understudied, among the most understudied and underreported. And we have sort of a death valley of scholarship, I think, on those decades. And that's one of the things about the Viola Muse collection that I think has so much to contribute to our scholarship, writing, and interpretation of those pivotal years. I think that the great years of the Great Depression continue to reach out to us in the 21st century, do they not? It was one of the most pivotal, and for many Americans, the most wrenching years of the 20th century. And by that I refer to even young children who grew up in the decades of the 1930s and experienced the disruptions of the Depression, adults, working people, and the elderly. That's something that I think we lose sight of. The long historical reach of those experiences really comes down into the present and writes itself upon our lives. And so getting a glimpse of Jacksonville through the eyes of Viola Muse is like looking through the wide end of a telescope at the past, and there are so many things that we could unpack and learn from that. It's just endlessly fascinating. The Muse collection was sent to the JHS in 1986 by Ms. Muse's former employer, Corita Doggett, of course. She was closing out her leftover materials, her written materials, her portfolio of writings from her years as the head of the Federal Writers Project, and she sent the material pretty much on her own initiative to the JHS. She distributed some of the other material to other local history organizations elsewhere in Florida. A lot of it wound up at the University of Florida in the P.K. Young Library of Florida History. But it's such a rich collection that we're fortunate to have here in Jacksonville. And we really value and appreciate the relationship with the University of North Florida and the initiative that has been headed by Dr. Leverette, Dr. Heffernan, and Dr. McCarl. We collaborated with them last year on a National Endowment for the Humanities grant for the digitization of this project. And it's a great example of the institutional collaborations that can help comb out the history of this endlessly interesting city of Jacksonville and the lives of its people. Well, thanks to all of you for being a part of this program. Our upcoming events include a presentation on April 26th on the history of the Mayport Lighthouse, and on May 1st, Dr. Leverette Hall's UNF colleague, Denise Bossi from the Department of History, will speak about the origins and the history of the French settlement at what we now know as Fort Caroline, one of the most mystifying episodes of early history in Northeast Florida, or at least early European history. Where exactly was Fort Caroline? Well, plenty of people are still scratching their heads about that. So stay tuned, and we'll hope to see you at upcoming programs, and thank you again so much for being with us. Thanks, Steve.